Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me now is my Forbes colleague, Chloe Sorvino, a staff writer here who covers the food industry. Chloe, thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me. Let's get into it.
Immigration was a top issue for Americans going into the 2024 election, and more voters thought that President Trump would be better equipped at handling the issue than Vice President Kamala Harris. And in this second term, we have really seen the Trump administration's hardline stance on both immigration and border security. ICE raids and deportations have been the cause of protests cropping up recently throughout the country, starting in Los Angeles. And you're writing and reporting about how exactly these deportations and Trump's policies when it comes to immigration is impacting the food industry. So talk to us about it.
Yeah, so in early June, as a lot of these enforcements and deportations and raids were happening, especially in California and in Los Angeles, which have made big headlines, they were also going into the heart of America's agricultural uh, center. So much of our produce is from the Central Valley in California. And early in this month, there were dozens of workers taken from their posts in fields and in packing houses across the San Joaquin Valley all the way up to the coasts. And it wasn't just in California. This was very widespread. Dozens were taken from small meatpacking plants in the Midwest. There was a dairy in New Mexico that also faced many deportations and workers just being taken from the job. And it really sounded major alarms because immigrants fuel America's agriculture industry. They're how we get food on the table. And without them, there will be major halts and stoppages and shortages that we will see on grocery store shelves and otherwise.
And you really raised this alarm in one of your recent newsletters. This is what you wrote. This is a dangerous game that's being played, the impacts of which will ricochet across the food industry. I mean, how soon are we going to see those impacts, and what exactly are they?
Yeah, I mean, if we can't get produce out of these fields or apples out of these orchards or, salads out of the Salinas Valley in Northern California, I mean, they will rot in the fields. They will not get to where they need to go. And I think it's important to say that, immigrants are powering this industry, but these are also jobs that if immigrants weren't filling them, they would not be filled. Most employers in farms and major agricultural operations talk about how America just does not have the employment pipeline for these types of jobs. They are good jobs. They are skilled jobs. It is not unskilled work, but because the food industry and agriculture industries are so dangerous and these workers are on the front lines of that Americans have just simply not been filling these jobs. And there's been a labor shortage for years, actually, in the farming industries. And immigrants have been, to the benefit of us all, have been filling these posts and doing the hard work and continuing to work when temperatures are hitting 100 degrees plus and extreme weather and smog and smoke and pollution are making it impossible to do their work. They still are getting food on tables, and targeting this industry will only create massive halts and shortages and stopgaps.
I'm curious what you make of this argument. I saw this post from NBC Latino that said this, quote, "The president of a meatpacking plant said there's no playbook on how to move forward after 76 workers at Glen Valley Foods in Omaha were arrested." Do you think that there's an element here, and I've seen this argument play out from Republicans and other critics, where the agriculture industry is taking advantage of these undocumented workers and they're exploiting them, they're not willing to pay them a fair wage, and instead they should be paying Americans and paying a fair wage there? What do you make of that argument?
It's a bit it's interesting because there's some things that are very true about it and there's some things that I think that are not very true about it, right? Because like taking a step back, food is both too expensive and too cheap. These businesses, the one of their biggest costs, especially when you talk about meat packing plants, for example, like their biggest cost is actually labor, right? And then otherwise it's like the chicken that they're purchasing to be able to slaughter. And so labor is such an expensive cost, and they've done a lot of like really controversial things over decades to keep those wages down as much as possible. So that's like not really like having anything to do with immigration. It just happens to be that immigrants and refugees and people who are for the first time in this country looking for work, those are some of the only jobs that are open, and it's where they're finding work because again there's been this labor shortage, and it's been impossible for many food processors to actually have plants running at full capacity right now. And that's been for years. And so, while yes, it should, these jobs should be higher paying and full stop, like all workers in the food industry who are so responsible for putting food on our table are being exploited and very much are working dangerous jobs and getting paid very minimal amounts to do that, and like putting their bodies in harm's way to do that as they're speeding up lines and exploiting further, that really has nothing to do with the immigration. And I don't, it would take a lot more than just, upping prices. I mean, some of these jobs are actually quite competitive in terms of actually what they're getting paid, all considered. And well, I think you have different, levels of that, and depending on the different sectors between meat or, if there's salad in the field or what have you. But at the end of the day, these immigrants deserve to get paid way more than they do too. And I know with that example of that Omaha processing plant, they were actually targeted because they were involved in a voluntary program with the agriculture department that, they were reporting how many immigrants they had. And that's why it ended up like turning back on them and flipping the whole thing around. And that's happened at meatpacking plants over the years, many times actually. So that's not exactly new. But what is important about this is that we need to be highlighting how actually the folks who are making us able to eat, as it's getting harder and harder to do that, like they need to be getting paid way better, and immigration or not. But immigrants are never going to be out of our food system. We will never be able to produce the amount of food we can in America that we need, and also how much we export, without immigrant hands touching it somewhere along the way.
And that's a really interesting point because DHS Secretary Kristi Noem said those who think we can ignore these sanctuary cities and ignore laws so that we can keep somebody in a job is absolutely ridiculous. That's not what America is about. We have a workforce and a generation of people here in the United States that have been cheated out of jobs because of illegal immigrants that have come to this country. You think when it comes to the agriculture industry in particular, the food industry really at large, that argument doesn't really make sense because but you're saying, and from your reporting, without immigrants, those jobs won't be filled. Those gaps simply won't be filled.
Talk to any employer, any big plant manager in the food industry, from meatpacking to apple processing to salad to corn, soybeans, at all. I mean, these are jobs that they would love them to be filled locally, but they can't. They simply can't, and that's been a problem for years. And it's actually only been getting worse. Like these immigrants are filling jobs that no one else will fill. And so I think we really need to, uphold that and lionize that and give them the respect they deserve for doing things that no one else really wants to be doing, again, because these are very dangerous jobs. These are caustic chemicals they're working with. These are harsh conditions. These are, serious environmental extreme weather that they have to deal with on a daily basis. And so, it shouldn't be taken lightly. And on top of that, I mean, just for decades and decades, generations and generations, immigrants have a history of being the backbone of the agriculture industry. And it's simply it's not the case that they're taking jobs from people that want them. There are lots of jobs open at almost any of these plants.
And so last week and this month and throughout President Trump's second term, we see dozens of immigrants being swept up in these ICE raids at different plants and farms. And it seems like someone got into President Trump's ear. I believe it was farmers, according to him. And as we know, President Trump got his start himself in the hotel industry. And it seemed like he was going to lay out some exceptions. This is what he posted on Truth Social last week. Our great farmers and people in the hotel and leisure business have been stating that our very aggressive policy on immigration is taking very good, long-time workers away from them, with those jobs being almost impossible to replace. In many cases, the criminals allowed into our country by the very stupid Biden open borders policy are applying for those jobs. This is not good. We must protect our farmers, but get the criminals out of the USA. Changes are coming. And the reporting from this week now paints a very different picture because last week there was a 180 on President Trump's deportation policies that they were going to curb deportations and raids at farms, restaurants, and hotels. This week, DHS is walking that back, is reversing course. What do you make of this really ricocheting guidance when it comes to deporting people on farms, people in hotel businesses, people in the ag industry in general?
What I make of it is that these immigrants are doing the work that no one wants to be doing, and at the same time, this become a political football where our food system is what's on the line. Food insecurity and the insecure future that we've been put on because of these policies ricocheting and going back and forth and causing a complete chaos for something that is one of the oldest industries in America, if not the oldest in the world, right? Well, one of anyway. Um, I think it's important that I I'd love to see farming and food be excluded because at the end of the day, food is political. It always will be. But I also think you saw in that Trump was getting scared, right? Because actually, some of my reporting has some very interesting kind of political connotations for this. Food prices, and particularly meat prices, have been this interesting kind of indicator over the years where if an incumbent tries to go up for office again from presidents or a congressional party or what have you, and if meat prices have increased more than in the prior term, they they have never in American history come back into office because they get voted out because food prices are such an important thing for voters. And at the end of the day, these immigration policies, these raids, these ripping families apart from each other, I mean, that is what unfortunately people are, if they haven't felt it already, they will feel that in their pocketbooks when they go to grocery stores. And it's only going to be the start of that.
And I think that political fact was in your book, Raw Deal, which is a great read. So, first, plugging your
Thanks.
book there, Raw Deal, everyone read it. But second, in that book, it really shows how if one link in the food industry chain falters or breaks, I mean, the whole thing comes really crashing down. And I feel really lucky because I have talked to our colleagues in money and politics. I've talked to them in healthcare, in tech. Now I'm talking to you in the food industry. And when you're looking at President Trump's policies, a lot of things that come up are the unintended consequences of them. If X happens, Y somewhere else in a different industry happens. What do you think are some of the unintended consequences when it relates to food and ag coming from President Trump's really tough immigration policies?
Yeah, I mean, to start, we're going to see prices going up. We are going to see less variability, less variety in stores, especially if this continues. You're going to see some cuts of meat, for example. If this immigration rating continues, especially in the Midwest and in America's heartland, I mean, we will see certain cuts of meat simply not being available. It's about to be, it's burger season, it's summer, right? Like, could we not be having enough grilling? At the very least, meat prices are going to be increasing, and so will everything else. And we've already been facing years of food prices of increasing and different surges and commodities that historically were quite low rising more than they had for years and years. And it's a time when Americans are really hurting, and I think that's getting lost in this entire equation here. Aside from that, I think you're also seeing food just in general being put on the front lines of this war in a way that we shouldn't be messing with food. We already have a huge food insecurity problem in this country. We have so many millions and millions of children who don't get enough food to eat. Now you're going to be having more waste, right? You're going to be having, plants not able to make as much production as they typically could because of this labor shortage getting worse and worse. And you're going to be seeing, just the kind of the vulnerability of our food system and the fragility there, really taking hold more than potentially even in the pandemic. Because if you recall the pandemic, it was the workers not showing up to the lines because they were so scared, because there wasn't PPE in place and there wasn't protections in place, and so many people were getting sick because these plants became hotbeds of pandemic outbreak. And because of that, that's when we saw so many shortages. But that was very actually short. This is going to be having ramifications for generations to come, because this is how our agriculture industry works, like full stop. And it's not just going to be 2 months of some workers not showing up. This will be not just this round of workers who are getting deported, but this will create a hole in generations of future, farm and food, simply.
And I said at the top of this conversation, immigration was one of those top issues facing voters in 2024. The other main one was the economy. And it's interesting to see how President Trump's stance and policies on immigration can really affect the economy, as you're saying. But we know that produce and meat, they have a shelf life. So how soon will the everyday Americans start feeling the impacts of these deportations?
With the reversal from this past week, with the Trump administration saying no, they will continue to target agriculture, farms, food processors, restaurants. I mean, that will come, I think, very significantly, because you also have to think about the time we are in right now. June to the next few months, this whole summer, September, October, November, like this is going to have to be prime harvest season for probably the vast majority of almost everything America produces, right? And so they are taking out critical workers from the supply just as they're about to have to harvest, which means like they're not going to be able to fill those roles. They already haven't been able to fill all the roles. And so they're not going to be able to fully harvest. And so, there's a lot of food, right, that's in grocery stores, and it takes a while to, actually make it to us.
You've been covering food for a while now, and I'm curious, what are your sources saying about this? I mean, how dangerous is this for their businesses?
This is so critical for their businesses. Business owners are freaking out. And our industry, our agricultural supply chain has been erected over these past 5 decades or so to be as big as possible, to have as few kind of corporations at the top as possible. But that means that when, one or two of these businesses are targeted, it actually has a major impact quite quickly. And so I think that's also what we need to be keeping in mind, because the scale here and like the multitudes that just one raid hits is massive. And it's really hard to overstate that.
And what do they want to see as this fix here? Would they want to get these migrants fast tracked to be citizens or permanent green card holders, or perhaps have working visas? I mean, what do they think the solution should be?
I mean, I think you have a lot of different thoughts and a lot of different, in regions of farming in this country, obviously. But at the end of the day, immigrants fuel the agricultural industry, and it's how we get food on our plates across the country and around the world, to be honest. And so they want a path to citizenship. They want a place where they can have immigrants protected and not scared to just show up for a shift. It's really as simple as that. Agriculture has been a place where immigrants have found refuge for generations and generations. And just because one administration comes in and says they're going to, target immigrants across the board, I think we're going to see some leeway happening, just because the ramifications are too great. And so we saw the weekend backtrack. It's now gone different, but we know Trump's a good negotiator and he is always negotiating. So I'm sure we have not seen the last of this.
Well, Chloe, I appreciate your reporting. I always appreciate our conversations. Thank you so much for joining me, and I hope to talk about developments as they come in.
Sounds great. Me too. We'll stay on it.